Hello, and this is one podcast that I'm really looking forward to. Welcome to the Legal and General Just Covered podcast, where we talk to intermediaries and key stakeholders in the intermediary space. My name's Wayne.
And I'm Georgia, and we are joined by two lovely ladies from L&G Retail. We have Victoria Jefferies, Market Development Director, and Jo Coan for the Strategic Partnership Director. Hello, guys.
Hi, ladies. How are you?
Good.
Excellent. Great to have you here today. We're here to talk about something really, really important, aren't we?
Yes, International Women's Day. Thank you so much for joining us on this one. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think of on International Women's Day?
Shall I go first? So, International Women's Day, I've been part of it for sort of the last 10 years in different guises and trying to be on panels and celebrate it as much as possible. For me, it's just bringing awareness to things. So at the minute, there's still huge gaps wherever we look. So gender gaps, pensions gaps, and that in turn goes to a wealth gap. So for me, International Women's Day is just bringing around awareness about what's actually happening in the world and just trying to have a bit more inclusivity into things.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. And I think over the years, International Women's Day has really made some strides forwards. Like, we are seeing changes and things are happening, but it's still really important that we keep this day alive and in focus, because we have still got lots of areas that need improvement. So it's about awareness, it's about getting people engaged. And I also think it's as well about bringing younger people into the movement as well, because some of us have been around a while, doing it for a while. So it's about bringing that next generation through and making sure that they understand the purpose and can drive forward that change, which inevitably we still need.
And it's been around for years, hasn't it? Over 100 years, I believe. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah,
it is. And I suppose you still think does still matter, doesn't it? We still do need to talk about these things, and especially with the younger. Is that what you're noticing more or less?
I think there's different challenges now, isn't there? So, I mean, we've just gone through the 50-year anniversary of women being able to get a mortgage on their own without a man signing it off.
Yeah.
It's only 50 years ago. I mean, I'm not going to reveal my age, but, you know, it's kind of my generation. And I think it's really important that young women understand where we've come from and where we are now. But equally, we've still got lots of different challenges. Like, you know, TUC came out with stats last week. There's still a massive pay gap. Mm-hmm. And actually in our sector, I mean, overall the gap's something like 14%, but in our sector, it's actually 27%.
Yeah.
So in financial services specifically, we do still have this huge gap in pay between men and women. And that will probably disproportionately affect younger women, those that are coming through the ranks and getting promoted, because let's face facts, we're still going to have babies and menopause. So we're still going to have different challenges to men.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't be happening, as we're acknowledging today, and all the way. You know, it's bringing this to the fore and exposing it. Well, not exposing it, but promoting it, if you like, the International Women's Day itself.
Definitely.
Jo, what are your views on that?
Yeah, I think it's celebrating, you know, talked about gaps there, but it's also celebrating the progress. And progress and gaps can still coexist in the same space. So we talked there about, you know, the salary gaps and pay gaps, but a bit more facts and figures on that. So an average man in the UK at the minute earns, for every £1 he earns, a woman will earn 87 pence. So that 13 pence doesn't sound like a huge amount, but if you compound that over 40 years, that actually equates to a 40% pension gap.
Yeah.
And that isn't just a monetary gap, that's a huge wealth gap. And that depends, like, it makes a difference in where you live, what you eat, what holidays you go on, or, you know, how you heat your home. And I think that's the difference. That's the bit, like, yes, let's celebrate the progress that we've made, but let's also highlight the gaps that are still there.
The journey, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
And why do you think it's so big in the financial services industry then? What do you think, why is that different to kind of the average?
Yeah.
What, in terms of pay gap?
Yeah, you said kind of, was it 13% versus 27% in terms of pay gap? Why do you think that comes about?
I think it's a combination of things. I think there are quite traditional jobs in financial services sector that perhaps have appealed more to men that have been on career progression. So we know that, for example, in the FTSE 100 businesses, the finance directors, women have got a much lower percentage than men. I think it's something like 13% are women versus men. So that kind of like structured training development through like actual traditional financial roles is different for men and women, and that's factually articulated. I think it's also worth pointing out that women have lots of different types of career paths, like lots of stop-starts and lots of diversification, whereas traditionally men have come into one industry and followed a route. So if you think about women like flip-flopping stops and starts in their career, they might have come into financial services later, or they might have become earlier, come out, come back in, and that does bring about a disadvantage just because of, you know, how female lives are and the different challenges they have. I mean, the big elephant in the room is, and Jo and I still feel it sometimes, probably actually more in the wealth side than in the mortgage and protection side, is I can still be definitely in the minority in a room in our industry.
Thanks so much for joining us today on the L&G Just Covered podcast. If we've piqued your interest with our Advisor Academy, new to 2026, then please do just click the link in the show notes below. You can then catch up on all of our on-demand, flexible 9 hours worth of content for you as an advisor. And also you will be able to catch up on all previous Just Covered podcast episodes as well. So if you want to watch that at 1 a.m. in the morning, go and click it below as well. Thank you. But would you be able to kind of maybe articulate a little bit more about your own career paths, like how you've got to where you are, those flip-flops that you've both mentioned? How did they kind of look for you, and how do you think they maybe impacted where you are at this moment?
Yeah, so like most people, I accidentally ended up in financial services. Maybe that's another factor. None of us sat in the careers office and said, hey, I want to work in financial services. So that's the first thing to point out. I did very well academically at school, but then decided when it came to A-levels that I wanted to make my own way in the world and earn some money. So I kind of bypassed college and university. Started off working in retail, loved it, loved working with clothes and fashion and all of that. But ultimately, that was never going to pay the bills. And I bought my first house when I was 18. So I had a mortgage when I was 18, which is quite a responsibility that...
But amazing though, what an
achievement. When I look at my 18-year-old daughter now, I'm like, oh my God, how did I ever do that? But I did. I actually had a 3-bed terrace as well. Can you imagine that at 18?
That's amazing.
So that was interesting. So for me, it was about making I needed to be very independent because of my family circumstances. It was about making my own way in the world and making money. So I started off as an insurance advisor, commission-based. And obviously you can earn really good money doing that type of job. I worked in a traditional insurance business, very corporate, and quite quickly moved through the ladder. So advisor to branch manager, to multi-site manager, to area manager, then in business development. And I was running a team of like 150 people by the time I was like 25, and never really sort of batted an eyelid, but just like really successful, really sales driven. Insurance still didn't excite me, but it was the sales and it was the relationship side that I really, really loved. I was very much in the minority as a female leader in that business. And I was also in a minority because I was up against people that had done graduate schemes. So most people had accelerated into management through graduate schemes. And of course I wasn't. So I always felt I had to work a little bit smarter, a little bit harder. And I was always like overly competitive to try and get ahead.
Are you competitive? I don't know. I'm not sure if it's true.
Aren't all of salespeople competitive? We can't help
you've got to have it in there.
You had the experience though there, didn't you, that they didn't have, which you may not have recognised at the time, which would have been really helpful.
Really good
I
point.
had bills to pay, you know, and it was all on my shoulders. So that's motivation in itself, isn't it? And also, you know, I came from a family where my mum never worked. She was a stay-at-home mum predominantly. And I was like, that is not the life for me. So I think that sort of shaped me in that respect as well. And I did, you know, I had a long time in that side of the role. And then as all things evolve and things get really expensive in the universe, we closed the entire branch network. So we closed all of our face-to-face operations. And I was shipped off into head office in Cheltenham to go build propositions, be creative. Here's a blank piece of paper, go for it. So I went from having all these people and all this management stuff to just like complete creative space, which was terrifying, but also really exciting. And it was actually in that role where I did work with many more women. So I worked in a marketing department with lots of creative people, and that was absolutely brilliant. I learned so much working in that team, and we created some amazing products that were so successful. It was brilliant. But ultimately, once you've created the proposition and you've developed something, you're not needed anymore. So I got made redundant from there. And actually, funnily enough, I'd been made redundant on my second mat leave. There's actually a funny story about my first pregnancy, actually, that's probably relevant. So let me just share that with you. So when I was pregnant with my eldest, Imogen, there was a promotion coming up and there was a pool of people. And I was called into the office by the sales director at the time, and he said, now, I've got this promotion, I've got several roles and a group of people, but you're a woman of a certain age and you're probably going to have babies soon, so therefore I'm not going to give you the promotion because I've already taken a risk on another lady and I don't want to take a risk on both of you. And I went, okay. Because I just could not believe it.
I can't believe it was vocalised, let alone...
He actually said that to me. So in typical me style, what did I do? Proved him completely wrong, that he'd made an absolutely ridiculous decision. The other girl did get pregnant. I covered her mat leave and acted up in that role. And do you know what? Even at that, he said, well, I'm not going to give you the proper money now because obviously I'll have to, because then I got pregnant. He said, I'll have to pay you when you go on maternity leave and I don't want to pay you. So I'll just give you a temporary payment. Then I interviewed for the job when Imogen was 6 weeks old. He made me come in and interview for the job because another vacancy had come available. And then I went back to work after 12 weeks in that role that I'd already been doing for 12 months before.
Did you feel pressurised to come back to work after the 12 weeks?
100%.
Yeah.
I felt like, I thought if I don't go back now, that's it, like I'm done.
Is that a common theme that you would both...
Yeah.
It's
more, I feel sad about it. It's more people that I hear talking to at work. Like somebody at Legal in General, they came back to work after 6 weeks because they felt that they had to. Yeah. This is 20 years ago. And I just think, isn't that such a sad... Like, I feel sad for people who feel like they have to come back and they've got that... I think societal pressure as well, that they can't do both. My mum, actually, she was a nurse. She was a matron on a ward, had a really good position. You know, she was 26. She had my brother in 1980. And at the time, she couldn't go back and have that position unless she went back after 6 weeks. So she had to lose almost like a title and a station, so to speak, and had to go on what then was the nurses' bank. So things haven't changed that much when you think, I mean, it's a long time since, it's 46 years ago, but, you know, there's still bits of that lingering around, which is just, like I say, I think sad is the way I feel about it more than anything else.
Yeah. It's, and then actually, you know, when I went on to have my second daughter and I was made redundant, and that actually allowed me to take more I had 12 months off second time round because I'd been made redundant and financially I could. Yeah. And it made me realise what I'd missed out on. Because actually, in the first year of Imogen's life, there's so much that I can't actually remember. Yeah. Because I'd gone back to work so quickly. And it was just, it's really, really sad. Because actually, in the grand scheme of things, it probably wouldn't have made a difference to where I am now in my career. It might have taken me, you know, a little bit longer to build that back up. But yeah, that was quite a significant thing. And I always say to women, like, just take it. No matter what you think, no matter how you feel the pressure, you must take that time because you genuinely can never get that back. You know, she's 18 and at uni now, and I'm like, oh my God, how did that happen? It's, you know, it's really, really
It's
difficult.
so important that you give that back, you give that advice back to young ladies that are coming through, that look, just take it, because, you know, you're in senior positions and stuff. It's so crucial, isn't it? So, Jo, from your story, so Vikki's obviously with us now as well, culminated in coming with us. And I know there's a whole rest of your career which we can perhaps elaborate on a little bit further. So how did you end up in the industry then, Jo?
Well, like Vikki, I didn't plan to go into financial services at all. I've only been in financial services for the last 7 years. So prior to that, I worked in software and sales. I'd just come back from maternity leave as well. The company that I worked for bought out by a big American firm. They made a huge amount of redundancies. I was one of the ones that stayed, but the company had changed, like the atmosphere had changed, and I knew I needed to get a new position. So I had 2 young kids at home. Financially, I had to work. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I knew I needed a certain amount of money. I just moved house. a load of other different reasons why I had to do it. So I saw a job for senior implementation manager on LinkedIn, and it had the salary bracket that I was looking for, and it was for asset management and legal in general. I did not have a Scoobies on what on earth it was to do. But I applied for the job, and unbeknownst to me, I was the wild card. So they were looking at a different array of people. They had 2 people who applied for the job that were already in that position. They just weren't in a senior role. But they interviewed me just to see what else was out there. So I didn't know anything about pensions. I knew nothing. So I went into the interview and threw everything at it. And I put this world-class framework together on and almost sold myself, because I knew that I could sell, I knew that I could build relationships, and I knew that I could learn. I just had to tell them how I would do it. So this was this 12-month plan of how I would, become an implementation manager. And lo and behold, I got the job. So that's how I ended up in financial services. So the wild card paid off, and then yes, it worked out all right. And then within 12 months, I had implemented over £1 billion of assets to L&G's asset management platform. So I did okay. And then 18 months after that, I was managing the team. So probably like a massive accomplishment, but a huge learning curve, and all whilst having a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old who didn't sleep.
Why did the second one not sleep?
Absolute
Why
horror.
is that?
From 2 till 4 every night, she used to be awake, having the time of her life. And I'll be going out doing pitches for anything from chips to oil companies, thinking, what am I doing here? Singing nursery rhymes at home. So yeah, it was steep, but it was something that I suppose set us up for the rest of my journey in financial services, that, you can learn new skills. And, if you've got those basic core skills, they can be, you can switch that to so many different industries.
Yeah, that's so good, Jo. I love that.
And I think it sounds like you build a resilience up by actually being a mother and having to juggle those aspects as well.
Yeah, and I think resilience is such a key word, especially when it comes to working mothers, or just working in general. And I love the quote that if you're not feeling turbulence, then, if you're feeling turbulence, it just means that you're rising. And I really like that.
That's good. That's
nice. Sometimes when things feel really uncomfortable, it just means that you're growing. So it does feel uncomfortable at the time, but, you look back on it and go, actually, I've moved, I've progressed. So yeah, it was definitely turbulent, but it worked out all right.
Well, it's doing really well, and obviously we love working with you as
like
well.
working with you.
Going more
It's all
kind of
good.
cross-function now, aren't we, with annuities, protection, like really sort of filling that. How else would you say being kind of that female and having those sort of life experiences impacts you on more of a day-to-day basis? Both of you. What do you draw from that?
Well, we're laughing about the tiredness, but genuinely, that is a huge thing, is being able to manage that and sort of keep on top of stuff all the time. Like, I do think to myself, like, you're just going to be tired forever. Like, it's okay. Like, I've got out of the little baby stage, and now my children are up till God knows what time at night, and now I'm perimenopausal, so I just don't sleep at all anyway. So I've kind of like gone full circle. And I think it's, to your point, it's okay to feel like that. It's okay to feel tired, to feel a bit overwhelmed. Perfection, let me tell you now, does not exist. So when you're looking, particularly now on social media, and you're looking at people and you're like, oh my God, they've got it sorted. Their relationship, their job, their money, their house, their kids, everything's perfection. It's not true. The law of life is that you can't have everything perfect. And do you know what? It's all right to be imperfect.
Yeah.
And almost like once you sort of shed that and you embrace imperfection, it is kind of a bit of a life-changing thing, because you're not always chasing something else. You're doing your bit and you're developing yourself. And I think like some of that attitude and way of thinking is a huge thing that I've learned, especially as I get older. Like you do sweat the small stuff a lot less.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it creeps back in, but you have to tell yourself not to. But I think that's really important, that, imperfection is normal. And that applies to men and women, can I just say?
Yes.
I just think like sometimes, particularly if you are a woman and you're, main breadwinner, main caregiver, genuinely emotional support to everybody in her life as I am, and I think you are as well, Jo.
Yeah.
Like it can feel a bit overwhelming sometimes, but it does apply to men and women. I think social media is a real challenge in terms of this perfection piece and what people perceive to be successful versus the reality is getting through the days, doing a good job and giving your kids a kiss at night is actually more than satisfying, isn't
and
it?
that's your gold mine, isn't it? Because at the moment, burnout's so huge, isn't it? At least that's coming to the fore now, and you need to be really cognizant of the fact that you don't have that burnout. And I like the way you say about stepping back and thinking, okay, don't sweat that perfection, because you're right, it isn't perfection as well. And be able to step back and just say, right, just concentrate on your own journey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I watched a podcast last week actually with Michelle Obama, and she was talking about how you can't have everything all of the time. And
That's
that
so
almost
true.
like your life is like chapters, and that, you know, you can be great fitness, you can be a great mum, you could be on top of the career goals, but you can't necessarily have that all of the time. And I think there's a lot of power in vulnerability. So going back to your question before, Georgia, I think what I've learned over the years is that being vulnerable isn't a bad thing. Being vulnerable is this huge amount of power in that. To say to somebody, do you know what it is? I am tired. I am struggling. I have got severe mother's guilt. You know, I do feel like I'm failing. I do feel like I've got imposter syndrome. It's okay to have all of those things. And this is for everybody, not just for women or for men. It's for everyone. And I think you're right, social media does play a part in that. But it's also up to other people to say, do you know what? I haven't got all of my stuff together. I'm not, you know, I am literally just stopping plates from falling in this. I just feel like my life is like a deck of cards all the time. And I'm constantly just hoping that the wind doesn't blow a different way.
And how powerful is it when you do share that? Because that must resonate with others straight away.
Yeah. And I think there is a massive amount of power. I did a presentation a few years ago with my mentor, John, and it was all around vulnerability. And at the time, I'd just come through a divorce. My child had a chronic disease. She got diagnosed with that. And it was like all these huge life shifts that you do, I call it a life quake. So it is literally where everything that you thought was right in your life is literally shaken to your core. And then you're having to almost pivot your life in a different direction. And I think talking about that and people being open and honest of like, look, I did experience huge amounts of grief. I did experience huge amounts of financial difficulty. I did have to reassess what I was doing with my life. You know, what am I doing with my job? All of these things. What's my support network? It's there's nothing bad about that. It's just showing that you're human, really.
And it's really interesting. Two things you said. Firstly, you've both come through your respective, well, both in the same industry, obviously, and you've probably built up that resilience, that facade where you don't want to share. But then we're finding out vulnerability is really good to share, particularly nowadays.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned your mentor, John.
Yeah.
So, and we were going to ask around the sort of allyship as well, weren't we? With that. So tell us about John. How important has he been for you and other allies in your life?
Yeah, amazing. Is probably, so John's been my mentor for the last 6 years. I met him at an event, an asset management event. He was presenting on stage. He's an investment manager. So at the time, my Achilles heel, so to speak, was investments because I hadn't come from an investment background. I almost felt very insecure about it. So I knew I needed a mentor and I needed to find somebody that could not fix my problem, but had something that I didn't. And he was also a brilliant presenter, and he just had this presence on stage that I was like, I want to be friends with him. So I approached him at this event and I was like, hi, John. I actually had a bet with my friend Brian, who's like, he won't be a mentor, he's too busy, Jo. Anyway, so again, I am quite competitive. So he was just like, look, Jo, I'll have a coffee with you. I'll come and meet you. And then he introduced us to his friend, his colleague, Nicola. And then 6 years later, he's still my mentor. So yeah, he's been amazing from not just for my career, just for my personal life. And, when I was going through my divorce, I also talked about that with John. Not the nitty gritty details of it, but, how it was impacting my whole entire life. How I turned up to a meeting room, it does affect you.
It does.
So yeah, John's the only way I can describe it, I haven't got a seat at the table, I know I've got a voice in the room because I know he has been my biggest cheerleader. And there is other people, and interestingly, other men around the L&G business. I talked a bit about Brian there as well. They have always been in my corner, and I like, whether my stock has been high or low, they've always had my back. And they've always had my back in.
And I think it's key because we've mentioned vulnerability. And I think that's something that men struggle with actually as well. So understanding and having that mentor-mentee relationship, you're leaning on each other as well. I know you're big on mentorship, Vikki. Like you've mentored and you've been menteed. How have you found that with a male kind of gaze on that as well? Has that brought quite a bit for you?
So I had to admit at an event the other week that I am a mentoring addict. I mean, how bad is that? I'll admit
It's not a
now.
bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. It's good.
I can't say no to people.
Right.
And I've actually sort of carved out a bit of a niche in terms of young women in the industry looking to take their next steps in their career. So that's kind of a bit of a niche for me, and why I feel like I can't say no to people. As somebody that has mentored a lot of people and currently has quite a high work rate on mentoring, I can honestly say it is the most rewarding thing that I have ever done. I get as much out of it as my mentees do. I learn something new every time I have a conversation with someone, whether that's something from my past that sort of resurfaces for me and reminds me of something, or whether it's just learning about different experiences and different ways that people do things. It's fundamental. So if people are listening to this and they're not mentoring people, anybody can mentor. You've just got to be matched with the right person. That's the 100% most critical thing. I think why I am so inspired by mentoring now is because I actually had a slightly different mentor relationship than Jo had. I actually was really lucky to be given an exec coach in my previous role. And the specific reason for the exec coach was sort of elevating myself into like that board level position, and the difference that it is from doing the day-to-day to being a significant decision making, how to be in the boardroom, how to influence in the boardroom, how to dominate conversation without coming across as a bossy or aggressive woman when you're just being assertive, that kind of thing. And that was with a lady who'd been there and seen it and done it all. And she was absolutely fabulous. Similar to Jo, I talked a lot about my personal life and sort of barriers that I had and sort of things that I'd put in my mind as blockers that actually just needed to be broken down. So probably straying a little bit into sort of like counselling as well as sort of like business coaching and mentoring. But it was absolutely game-changing for me. Like, it just unblocked so many preconceived ideas or things that I'd put in as barriers in my way. It really broke that down. And really importantly, allowed me to be myself and authentic, but taken seriously. Because I've always struggled with that concept of, if you go to that next level and you are in the boardroom, does that mean you have to be that guy in the grey suit that's very serious? Yeah.
And you don't, because I mean, and for people that don't know, Vikki's my boss, so hope this goes well. But I do think, you have your personality, and that is what you draw out of us in our team, and we feel very free to be able to just be ourselves, but also we get that you are also very good at making those big decisions, and strategically you're always thinking of different things. So it's amazing that you've been able to draw that out in a different way, maybe from mentoring. And
it's like finding your finding your confidence for that next level and sort of being confident in yourself. And I do think that's probably one thing that has changed over the years, is that authenticity now is seen as a strength.
It's now there, isn't it?
But it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
It was
I
a
agree.
vulnerability, I think,
when
before.
I used to wear a pinstripe suit every day without fail to the office, and everything was formal and memoed and everything was just so structured. People in the boardroom were not themselves. Authenticity was actually like a bit of a swear word, wasn't it?
You had to fit a certain mould, didn't you? And if you think about if you weren't from a certain class background either, particularly in financial services, I saw that. So, and you would have had that as well, maybe. I don't know.
Well,
you're not particularly.
What are you talking about, my ex?
I'm just saying general.
I found that to be a massive barrier. I don't know about you, Jo, but I've really struggled with that personally.
A posh voice that I put on sometimes, and I don't know I'm doing it, depending on who who I'm speaking with, because you do it you don't realise you're doing these things.
And I'm being a posh southerner, but actually from a council estate, and I wrestled with that. I thought when I used to I applied for a load of jobs and stuff like that, and when I get knocked back, I used to think, is it because they know where I live?
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I used to think. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a vulnerability again, isn't it? And it's like we all share that.
You know what I mean? And it's because this is what the industry was like, but that's not there anymore, is it? The things, obviously we've got a journey to go on, but the things like the authenticity piece is massive. And I think you're right. It's about a balance, being a gregarious, friendly person versus someone who's assertive in the boardroom. That's a real art to be able to do it. And obviously you've nailed it. So it's brilliant. And it just shows we can do it nowadays.
Accents are a good thing, aren't they? I think now.
Too right.
I mean, funnily enough, my mum I used to go to elocution lessons as a child. Can you believe that? I mean, literally talk about rebelling. But my mum and dad were like social climbers, and they thought that was what needed to happen. And I think I've always had a bit of a stigma because I didn't do it, and I rebelled, and I lived in the deepest part of Birmingham and got my accent even stronger in my 20s. But definitely, you know, in my early career, you know, what school did you go to? What university did you go to? You know, would you holiday in the south of France or we ski? And I'm like, I
think we
go
still
to
say
Spain with my
that,
nan and
though.
granddad. You know, like it is definitely class in the early part of my career was very, very prevalent, very prevalent.
What I do find interesting, though, with anyone talking about financial services, and especially women, you do fall into it. Many people do kind of fall into it. And yet there is still that idea, maybe more in the wealth space, of what school did you go to? What university degree do you have? What postgrad scheme were you on? When actually the people that we're talking to are everyday people from everywhere. So you still need to be relatable and someone that can bring out what's needed. The financial resilience is going to differ.
Well, it's that skill piece you were talking about, wasn't it? About some of the youngsters coming into the industry that might be particularly qualified, if you like, but the social element, they need to have that as well to resonate with clients, don't they?
And this goes directly back to the pay gap. So the reason why, one of the reasons why the pay gap is there is that there's, I said before, there's men in senior roles. And it's not that women don't know about those senior roles. It kind of starts at the grassroots. And you see it a lot in the STEM roles. So, you know, I was speaking to somebody last year about a developer role that had advertised. And, you know, there's certain checklists and certain things we have to do to make sure that we are inclusive in our recruitment, which is an amazing thing. But the issue with that was this person who was recruiting for the developer, no women were applying for the roles. So it's not that she couldn't, she just didn't have the pool of women who were applying. And the problem, it goes back to the grassroots, is because STEM roles in particular, women aren't going into that vocation. So then when it comes to the senior levels, there's not the women in that talent pool anywhere there. And it's the same with financial services. People aren't aware of the jobs that are there in financial services. So I was at school, you know, I was told to be a hairdresser. I think I would have been a good hairdresser. But anyway, you know, nobody talked to me about jobs in financial services or asset management. Nobody said that was an option. I wasn't the best person at maths, but what I do day to day is actually relationship building. And that's something that I am good at. And to me, that's a core skill. But nobody had that conversation. And I think it's opening those doors to those different types of career paths. And that comes down to, I don't want to say North class divide, but it does come down to some sort of social divide as well. Because I see it, and I have seen it, is that, you know, especially in the North, these sort of jobs aren't, you know, they're not necessarily offered, or nobody's spoken about them because nobody's aware of those jobs. So even now, when I talk to people, they say, what do you do? You know, financial services, or are you an accountant? No, I'm not an accountant. You work in pensions, you work in annuities. You know, people aren't aware of the jobs that are available. And I think there's a lot of, you know, education that needs to be done for everybody to make it more inclusive.
Promotion, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's actually there. Firstly, it's there, and this is it, explained in a simple way.
Yeah. And I think for me, I know you mentioned about the sort of the checklist on the job role. For the market development role, when I initially went for it, and Hazel just covered podcast host, she really championed me to go for the role, because actually, if I was being brutally honest, I didn't feel like I ticked every single thing off on that list. So I wouldn't necessarily have gone for that in that moment. But actually breaking it down of what that means, actually, I did have the skills in all those areas. but maybe I just didn't champion myself in the right way to do that.
Which is really, really common.
It's very common. And I do wonder if
men
women
will,
do that
I can't
more.
remember the stat, but there is a stat about men will go for a job when I think they're like 50% of the skills, whereas women need to be at like 95% before they'll even apply.
Yeah.
It's just a complete mindset and confidence thing, isn't it?
We've talked about that before. I remember you saying that stat. Yeah.
And there is a
crazy,
confidence
really,
gap, and it goes back to this imposter syndrome in women. You know, there are a lot of studies that are done on this that shows that women have more imposter syndrome than men.
Yeah.
So whatever reason that is, but it's a fact.
And do you think as well, because I was thinking about this last night, I think women are less resistant to go for new jobs because also, going back to your point about caring responsibilities, they're worried that their new boss or their new employer might not give them the current flexibility or that they're going to have to go through everything again of this is what I do, this is how my week works. And there's almost like that fear factor of what you've got comfortably set up, especially if you're sandwich generation with older and younger, that it kind of works. And therefore, why would you want to upset the care and responsibilities just to get that next job? I think that holds people back.
I think they're on the back foot, aren't they? So straight away, you're going to
Definitely.
be looking inwardly. You know, and a lot more women, I get it, the stats are there with regards to having more imposter syndrome than men. Not all men don't have it though.
No, very, very true to point that out as well, though.
That is
Acknowledging
true.
that. But
That
you're
is
right.
true.
But I think also a lot of men, again, it's that bravado piece, don't want to say. So we learn, you know, the amount of women we've got in senior roles at Legal and General now, just look at yourselves, we're learning
amazing.
and I've seen the journey, we've talked about it, and what the financial services was like before. And I've learnt so much from the women I work with and others in my life and stuff that's really taught me that the vulnerability piece is the biggest part of it, I think, because you're so good at just sharing yourselves and sharing how you feel, and we're all benefiting from that. And that's got to be a good thing.
And I think it's very key to definitely know that men really do have that place in helping support us. For me, certainly my old manager, Craig Dickinson, he was fantastic at being able to boost my confidence and help me go for different things when I got made redundant. And Vikki, you're my first female manager, so I'm learning from both sides. And I think but it's really important to note that, because at L&G we really do have that strong female managerial decision makers there, but also, you know, some men really do help so well. So can you give us a bit of an instance where you have found kind of male allyship really helping support being where you are now? I know you mentioned John.
I've had some amazing male bosses. One of the best bosses I've ever had was a male, because he really championed me and he really pushed us to push me more in a positive way, is what I mean. You know, he really saw my potential and wanted me to grow even further. I have had instances where I would probably call it unconscious bias is probably the best, you know, behavioural bias, that sort of thing. So people say things like that. Actually, I don't think there's any malice in what they're saying, but it's just, you know, the unconscious bias that's there. So a good example of that, when somebody found out that a colleague of mine who I actually managed at the time found out that I was going through a divorce, his comment was, well, that often happens with women like you who are ambitious, something's got to give. Now, my ex-husband was actually the biggest champion of my career and still is to this day, you know, so he has never questioned my career, and he was always, again, one of my biggest cheerleaders. And my divorce had nothing to do with that. So it was just really interesting that this person thought my divorce, my failure of my marriage was my fault, and, you know, was the accountability sat on my career. Now, I don't believe that person was being malicious. I don't think they intended for it to come out, but I think, you know, there was this unconscious bias in his head that's sort of his perception in the past. So I think it's just calling out things like that. And I still to this day, I don't think he probably even realised what he'd said. And there are still things that I say. I saw something like that last week. Somebody said something about baby brain. You know, and again, I don't actually think that person was being malicious. It was, you know, just probably a throwaway comment. But, you know, that throwaway comment on divorce was 4 years ago. So,
You still remember it
and
now.
I still remember it. And
Don't forget
Don't
it.
forget that.
and I
harbour
still
stuff
remember
like
how
that.
I felt, and that's the
Yeah.
difference.
That's the thing,
It's
it's how
how you
they
feel.
make People remember that.
Yeah, when you're already in a vulnerable position at that point, and you're just trying to, my job was actually my consistency. It was like my leveler, if anything. So that really, again, pushes your boundaries when you're feeling
It's
vulnerable.
frustrating though, isn't it? Because it's not even thinking before you speak. It's actually having an appreciation of things and what's right and what's wrong, is it?
Yeah.
It's the
before-
beliefs, it's challenging the beliefs,
it
and
is.
that's why it needs to be called out.
Yeah.
So in that situation, if you'd have been in company of a few people, if a guy had picked up the person on that, it would have had much more gravitas than Jo retaliating.
Yeah, and they wouldn't have
saying
said that to a guy either, would they?
And that's what I'm saying.
That's the
This is
thing.
where allyship is so fundamentally game changing.
Yeah.
Because when it comes peer to peer and it's called out, it just makes such a difference.
It's really key,
What's
because
such
that
a
might have
connection?
changed the feeling you were left with if
Yeah.
someone had called it out in that moment.
Yeah. And interestingly, I never addressed it with that person. I'm talking to you about it today, but I just sort of nodded my head.
What made you maybe not
I don't
feel
know.
even
You were probably shocked.
afterwards?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I
You were
think
like, I couldn't believe someone had said that.
I think I just sort of nodded and went, yeah.
Sometimes you are so shocked about things like that, aren't
Yeah.
you? You can't believe it. You just carry on because that's your default. But
Yeah.
you probably think, oh, why didn't I do it? But you just
Yeah, I just don't
didn't
think I
at the
knew
time.
what to say at the time, really.
Yeah.
It's not until I'm a big reflector, so it's not until I reflected on it, it was like, well, is it? So, and obviously you don't want to go into details of things, so...
And I think it's very key when we talk about male allyship and helping us call these things out, is that sometimes, men and women do think quite differently. And I think it's fine to say that, because actually how a guy would maybe say, well, why didn't you say anything, was because it changed how I reacted in that moment. I just didn't react how maybe you would react. And I think as women, we're almost a lot of the time told to just say yes or just nod your head and just go. So we do need that support to help us feel more empowered as well, to then be like, no, I'm going to call that out. Might reflect on it a little bit more and think on it, but then I'm going to go and have that conversation and have that.
so important though. We just
So
need to
important.
come together and just call it out. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, it's that we've got all these examples. These examples should not be happening.
No.
We should be collectively doing it. Obviously, men need to do much more of it, but everyone needs to do it, don't they?
Yeah, I think
But we
so.
shouldn't also assume as well, like, that I've got a couple of guys in my team that take the lion's share of childcare, for example.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And do school runs and that side of things.
There's that
And-
nowadays, isn't there?
Yeah, and I've been wondering about this in terms of like how that's perceived and stuff, but it's very normalised in our team. But I can imagine with other people that I know, they might say, "Oh, you're doing the school run," or like it's seen as quite a detrimental thing for a guy to do that. But it just should be normalised. We're equal. People are parents; they co-parent,
Yeah.
don't they?
And actually, sometimes guys have the tougher end at some points because they don't have the same maternity leave that women maybe do. They do have to go back to work. They can't take, because they're missing out on things that maybe they would want to. The dynamic in any relationship is different, and we don't know how that's going to look necessarily until we're at that point.
Yeah. And everyone's situation is very different. So I think, every couple's different. So, and I think it is that diversity of thought, and it goes back to this inclusivity, which I can't say, is that going back to International Women's Day, it's all about diversity. It's not just about women, and it's looking at the stats behind it. So I read a stat the other day that the top 25 companies who had the biggest diversification at board level were 25% more profitable. So it's proven that diversification actually makes a business more popular. And if you think about it, it's that diversity of thought. We all sitting here have got different backgrounds, different life experiences, even a north and south. So I was a child of the 80s, Wayne, growing up in the north of England. That would have been very different to you growing up in the south. We would have had
In the
different
70s.
Get that one in, ladies. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, and that goes down to race. It doesn't go back down to gender. It doesn't go down to location.
No,
it goes
no.
down to race, ethnicity, religion, all of that.
Yeah, that's so true.
And it's just trying to have a diverse environment in the workforce, and that to me is a lot of what International Women's Day is. It's just promoting diversity.
Yeah. And I think that's what we want to see when we think of advisors, mortgage brokers, protection specialists. We need that diverse thinking because you're talking to diverse clients.
Exactly,
At the end of the day, you need to be that relatable and have that conversation. We always say we champion everyone to be their authentic self because you need to build that. Don't try and be someone else that you're not when you're talking to a client, because you can spot it a mile away.
We're
as
a
well.
people business, aren't we?
Yes.
Essentially, forget the products and all the financial stuff. We are a people business. And that's really important to remember. That sort of diversification of thought and being able to relate to people, whether they're male or female, is the fundamental crux of being an advisor, isn't it? And being a really good one as well.
So looking forward then, I feel like we've kind of highlighted a lot. We know there are gaps. We know there's a lot more that we can do. What are we looking at? What advice would you give to young girls maybe getting into financial services?
Go on, Jo, you go first.
I've got loads of different, I think, I talked about being vulnerable and, putting yourself in uncomfortable positions to push yourself, but also a line that I use with my mentee, who's actually a male, the other week was, you run your own race. So, and I think it's especially important to say that to younger people, because the amount of comparisons that there is now, especially, for graduates coming out. I remember, in my early 20s, you had to do certain things, earn a certain amount of money, and people are going to have different chapters in their life.
With social media, it's worse now, isn't it?
Yeah.
By default,
Worse.
you're comparing yourself, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Running your own race.
You run your own race, and you're gonna have different targets at different points. The great story of, what is it, the hare and the tortoise?
Yeah.
You kind of got to compare it back to that. So, and people will get to their different milestones at different points. And it's all about what your milestones and your targets are, not what anybody else is doing. So that, I think that's what I would probably say to a young person, run your own race, and, get up and brush yourself off and get back on the bike. Kind of what I say to my 8-year-old, don't give up.
Yeah.
So, and your failures are all lessons. Failure is success in disguise, is the way I see it. You have to fail to learn. And some of my biggest failures in my career have actually turned out to be some of my biggest successes, because I've learned from it. You kind of have to fail to succeed. So don't be scared of failure.
Brilliant, Jo.
Yeah, that's good. I think for young people, my advice would be, just do something that you love, because you're probably going to be working till you're about 100. And you're going to have lots of different careers probably as well. The makeup of, young people now, their careers going to look very different to ours, for example, and our parents. So I think that's important. I think really specifically, I would say to women, not just young women, is just try to take away that fear factor. I always try and think, say yes to something and then worry about it later. Try not to put those barriers up and think, but if I do that, this is going to happen, and just say yes and then figure it out, because that will open so many doors to you. And exactly to Jo's point, not everything's going to be a success, but you will learn from your failures as well. But I think we do sometimes overthink things and hold ourselves back. So say yes, worry later.
I love that, because I think sometimes I'm very scared of failing and doing something wrong or it not working. And does that hold me back?
Yeah.
It could do sometimes.
We've all been there.
Yeah, we've all been there. Everybody has that, don't they? So brilliant. Okay, so in terms of moving forwards then, what do you think financial services need to do? More women involved, supporting men as well within that space. What does the future look like? So I think it looks pretty bright, I would say. I think we've got lots of good things, but we can take it further.
What can we be doing?
Yeah.
I mean, Jo talked about it a lot, about it starts at that front end, getting people interested in financial services as a career. So there's lots of good schemes at the moment. The Working Mortgages Scheme is promoting that. Mortgage Solutions, Diversity and Inclusivity Finance Forum has got some programs for school leavers, for example. So that's really great, and more of those schemes are really important. But actually, for me, it goes even before that, before the careers bit, it goes to fundamental financial advice, teaching children about money, buying houses, credit, debt, the lot, because that financial education is massively missing at the moment. So that's really important. And actually, as an industry, we can contribute to that and make a difference by working with government initiatives, etc. So that's really important. Then the career piece. And then it's about this nurture through the industry and how we keep people engaged in the industry. I know that with our advisor population, particularly in the mortgage side of things, we do have quite a high turnover. So I think we need to sort of understand why that is and why people don't stay actively engaged in the market for long periods of time. How do we retain people? And I think that's more, about diversification of roles. Like, it doesn't have to be number crunching. It could be something really creative. Yeah. It could be doing podcasts. It could be marketing.
We're pretty creative in our roles. We're in financial services. Yeah.
And I think it's just really bringing lots of different type of roles to the forefront and promoting different types of roles in our industry. Because I think we are very centred on mortgage advisor, IFA, you lead a lender, you lead a provider, but there's so much in between, isn't there, that gives so much career satisfaction.
There is. There were previous podcasts that we had where we had ladies that run their own mortgage businesses.
Yeah.
And, nowadays it's not necessarily 9 to 5, 5 days a week, is it?
Yeah.
You can do things around, especially when you've got children and all that type of thing, bringing up a family. See, the options now are so much more than they were, aren't they?
Yeah, you don't have to be in an estate agency 9 to 5 anymore. But do you know what? Funnily enough, loads of the women that talk about that say they're so busy at the moment that they wish that they could work flexibly, like they're working, because demand's there, which is great. Because for these small businesses, the fledgling businesses, it's just amazing. The opportunity's immense.
A lot out there, definitely.
What do you think, Jo?
I think it's exciting for financial services. I think the future is bright, and I think with diversity, more diversity is to come. And I think, there's going to be more different thoughts in the industry. I think people just need to probably be as authentic as this moving forward. And I think the industry is ready for that. There's going to be lots of changes. AI seems to be in every single article, and it seems to be doom and gloom. Well, actually, AI's, another work stream, like that's going to bring positive change. Yes, it is going to change some things fundamentally, but let's talk about it positively. Will it bring out more creative roles like this in the future? Possibly yes. Yeah. Will it bring out more relationship type roles in the future? Possibly yes.
You're right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because the relationship piece, you've still got to build it, and
you've got to have it.
Those tasks and other things you it can do much more efficiently.
Yeah.
You'll have more time to do the relationship building piece.
Yeah, exactly that. So I think the future's bright, and I think we'll just continue doing what we're doing, and hopefully these gaps that exist will get smaller and smaller.
Yeah. That authenticity piece as well, I'm thinking, if only this episode could be the step change for more authenticity. Let's hope so.
Yes, let's do that. So what we do have is we're trying to make that a bit more of a community. So we have had some previous guests that have left some questions for you. So we want to pose these to you, and I'd be very interested to see where these differ actually answer-wise between the two of you. But this was a question that I left after my first episode. So what happened in 2025 that maybe went wrong or didn't, that you learned from, and how have you learned from it moving into 2026?
Go first. So 2025 was a good year for me. I had a new role, lots of positive things personally and professionally. And every year I actually set myself a word. So me and my friends were having a word of the year. So last year's word of the year was consistency. So to be positive and the glass half full, that's kind of what I wanted to bring through into this year. I had the consistency in my life through a lot of different channels, and I just wanted to continue with that into 2026 and almost accelerate it even further. Look, there's a lot of things that have gone wrong over the last few years, but I was winning in 2025. So yeah, brilliant. Consistency.
Yeah, I think I'd sort of turn that question on its head, because I think as an industry, we do have this habit of talking ourselves down. So politically, economically, when we look at predictions, it can feel quite a negative place for advisors. But the fact of the matter is every year, no matter what is thrown at our industry, we keep bouncing back.
Yep.
Growth might not be exponential every single year, but growth still happens. Look at the rise of intermediated mortgages, for example. 90% of UK mortgages are done through advisors. That is huge. It's massive. So it almost doesn't really matter what happens economically, because we've got 90% to play around within that particular part of the market. I think we were all pretty worried about market study and the protection side last year, but actually that feels really positive now. We're kind of coming through that. We've got a record year of maturities, to the point I was making before about advisors being inundated. That's right in M&P and in the wealth side. My goodness, the IHT side of things, later life. People are going to be busy for years on end. Yeah. We actually have a shortage of advisors in the IFA space. So I think I wouldn't say anything goes wrong. I think what I would just say is let's not talk ourselves down. Let's do the glass half full kind of approach and always talk ourselves up, because it's a very optimistic environment. And no matter what happens, people are still going to be buying houses, and they're still going to be retiring, and they're still going to need financial advice. So something to be really proud of.
Let's back each other, back ourselves, and then shout about it.
Love that.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you very much for your answers, guys. I'm very intrigued, though. What is the question that you're leaving for our next guest? Vikki, if you can do the honours.
Well, obviously, we have an International Women's Day theme. So Jo and I have come up with this question. And our question is, what advice would you give yourself when you first started out as a young woman in our industry?
Be good to see the answer to that one.
Yeah, too right. That is an absolutely fantastic question. Thank you so much. Wow, what an episode that was. We covered so much. Thank you so much, Vikki. Thank you so much, Jo. I'm absolutely inspired going forward now.
I am.
We're all in it together.
We're all in it.
Positivity, authenticity. Let's go. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.